Welcome to the Dr. John Andrew Morrow Polymath Podcast. Today we're going native once again, addressing the issue of Louis Riel and the name Métis. If you enjoy our content, please subscribe. Louis Riel referred to himself and to his people as aboriginals, original half-breeds, aboriginal half-breeds, French Canadian, Bois-Brûlés, which means burnt wood, Métis Canadien, Canadian Métis, half-breeds, Métis Français, French Métis, and Métis. To these ethnonyms, he would have included the French term métis, métif, gens libres or free people, hommes libres, free men, and the English terms free men, country born, mixed blood, flower work people, and the Cree term api, tawi, Kosisan, the half people, Otipe Misiwak, the independent ones, and Wisa Ko de Winmi, the bird sticks, or the Algonquin Makwa, which was Gallicized as Magua. Other French ethnonyms for the Métis include Acadien, Canadien, Gaspésien, Hivernant, a voyager who wintered in First Nation camps, Marouiti, sans-mêlé or mixed blood, Sauvage, Voyageur, and remusqué or muskrat. They were also known in English as breed, bungie, burnt stick, half-blood, half-caste, and pork-eaters, among other terms peculiar to specific places and periods. While Riel only used a dozen of these ethnonyms, he was likely familiar with most, if not all of them, due to his travels and interaction with Métis people throughout North America. If French Canadian was a family name, the new First People also needed a first name. After considering all available options, Riel opted for the name Métis. As for the reason for using this ethnonym, Riel reasoned as follows. I want that distinctive name to be the Métis name that we have always carried. I believe the name Métis is likely to favor the founding of a powerful nationality in Manitoba and the Northwest. Although Riel's people bore many names throughout their history and ethnogenesis, the name Métis was the most constant and the most all-encompassing. He believed he could rally his people around the name in question to create a new nationality in Manitoba and the Northwest. This vision, however, did not exclude the Métis from other regions. They were also Métis by ethnicity. However, since the Métis were the majority in Manitoba and the Northwest at the time, this region was the most logical choice for creating a political Métis nation, namely a sovereign and independent state that was not subject to British, American, or Anglo-Canadian rule. Explaining the meaning of the word Métis, Riel wrote, Riel explains that the word Métis means mixed and that, until his time, it was used to describe mixed-race people in the Canadian case, namely those of mixed European and First Nations blood. He distinguishes between Métis people in terms of racial admixture and those who belong to the Métis people who came out of the French-Canadian molds. More than the product of admixture, the Métis had become a distinct people with a distinct identity and culture as a result of a historical process. Although they had branched off from the trunk of the French-Canadian tree that was rooted in the soil of Acadia in Quebec and which spread throughout North America, Riel believed that it was important for the Métis, regardless of where they were located geographically, to remember, remain connected with, and celebrate their French-Canadian origins. The Cajuns of Louisiana, for example, some of whom are Métis by genes, culture, and identity, have always retained a strong connection to their ancestral homeland of Acadia. Likewise, the Métis of the U.S. Midwest, the Prairies, the Pacific Northwest, and Northern Canada should not forget their origins in Lower Canada, Acadia, and, ultimately, France. As for selecting the ethnonym Métis, Riel reasoned as follows. The name Métis would be agreeable to everyone because it is not exclusive and has the advantage of properly referring to the contingent for which each nation would help found the new people. And from this point of view, I believe that it would be difficult to give as a basis for our nationality in Manitoba in the Northwest a broader and stronger idea than the Métis idea. After the failure of the Métis rebellions and the execution of Louis Riel in 1885, the Métis dispersed and submerged. They kept a low profile for the sake of self-preservation. They were hiding in plain sight. Since they had nowhere to retreat, some Métis scholars suggested that most modern-day Métis and non-status Indian people have little choice but to integrate as quickly as possibly into white society. Consequently, many of the Métis were assimilated to varying degrees into Anglo-Canadian or French-Canadian culture. Although all Métis are by definition persons who consider themselves Métis, notes Richard Slobodin, this does not mean that all Métis call themselves Métis or any equivalent thereof under all circumstances. For example, when applying for commercial fishing licenses at Hay River between 1959 and 1963, Slobodin noted that 46% of Métis applicants failed to enter Métis, opting for terms such as Cree half-breed, non-treaty Indian, and native non-treaty. He also pointed out that the people from the Red River used the terms Métis, breed, and half-breed to describe themselves. In contrast, the Northern Métis did not self-identify as readily as Métis and were more prone to use the terms breed and half-breed. This difference, he notes, derives from differences in histories of the two subgroupings. As Slobodin notes, and I hope I'm not slaughtering his name, but perhaps I am, Slobodin, who knows how to pronounce? I have no idea. The Northern Métis have little tradition appertaining specifically to their Métis status. This is in keeping with the shorter family lines since the original miscegenation and the shallow genealogies of Northern as opposed with Red River Métis. Writing in 1973, Terry Lusty noted that many Métis do not identify themselves as such. Some identified as non-status Indians, others as French Canadians, and yet others as Canadians. Regardless of the terms they used to identify themselves, the Métis existed and could not be disregarded. Since their status had been officially recognized, the same applied to their heritage. Due to backlash, racism, discrimination, exile, economic disadvantage, and territorial disposition, not to mention the traumatic impact of residential schools and forced assimilation policies, it would take generations for the Métis people of Canada to start regrouping and reasserting themselves. Following the execution of Louis Riel, writes Sébastien Mallette and Guillaume Marcotte, many Métis families hid their cultural heritage for fear of reprisals. The mounting racism toward all things indigenous also pressed the Métis to dissimulate their identity, historically associated with having some Indian ancestry. One of the first historians commissioned by the Métis, Auguste-Henri de Trémaudan, certainly felt that pressure when he suggested in a rehabilitative manner that the Métis assimilated easily to civilization, to such an extent that it is hard, if not impossible, to distinguish them from white settlers. Like First Nations, the Métis adopted whatever identity would offer them a better chance to survive, including joining indigenous bands, becoming treaty Indians, or hiding their identity to their children. Although it took a considerable amount of time for the term Métis to be adopted collectively, the signified exists in the absence of the signifier. Whether they were called Negroes, Blacks, or African Americans during various historical periods, the terms all refer to the same people. The same goes for the names used by the Métis and others to refer to themselves. Riel's vision was finally realized in the late 20th and early 21st century, when most of his people rallied around the term Métis. While many came from families that had always identified as Métis or half-breeds, others had previously identified themselves publicly as French Canadians or Acadians due to discrimination. Some, who were darker colored, even claimed to be Spanish, Hispanic, or Latino to avoid the stigma of being Indian. As Katie McLeod reasons, hiding one's identity in response to racism and colonialism can be viewed as a defense mechanism that many Métis individuals use to cope with their identities in a white society. The Mi'kmaq were faced with insurmountable hardships from the British. Living in British-controlled Nova Scotia meant living in fear of the blood one possessed, and if fitting in was possible, disguising oneself as European was a safer option for many. These tactical responses enabled the Métis to pass for white in public while maintaining their culture in secrecy. As Christina Fagan and her co-authors have noted, Métis is a term that still has a shifting and contested meaning, and that is used and rejected by various groups depending on their situation. Yet there is an ongoing effort by organizations such as the Métis National Council to define and stabilize the meaning of the word so that it can be used in the pursuit of political goals. Unlike Riel, who viewed the term as inclusive, the Métis National Council and most of its provincial branches treat it as an exclusive ethnonym that is limited to descendants of the Red River Métis, thereby dispossessing the vast majority of Métis people in Canada and the United States. As Sébastien Mallette points out, accusations of recent opportunism by fake Métis can easily be flipped on their head by suggesting that the political creation of more restrictive criteria to assess a Métis identity is the result of political opportunism of a number of Western Métis organizations that decided in the 1980s to sever from more inclusive Indigenous organizations. Although this exclusionary vision of Métis identity is espoused by some, Kennedy, Rivard, Gagnon, Chrétien, McNabb, Foskern, Marcotte, Bouchard, Mallette, and Pulla are among those who use the term Métis in a more inclusive manner. It should be noted, write Mallette and Marcotte, that not all Western Métis people endorse this now exclusionary ideology regarding Métis identity. On the contrary, many Métis in the Red River believe that there are Métis in different parts of Canada with their own cultures. In fact, the leaders and members of various Métis organizations in Eastern Canada are Red River Métis. As Peter Larivière notes, there are no universal pan-Métis definitions of Métis identity that would be acceptable to all political Métis organizations of the state or by Métis people themselves. As he warns, the term Métis, like the term Aboriginal, may be used from a position of power to limit, redefine, and possibly destroy the identity of many nations and peoples into one neatly packaged group that then has to appear before the courts with some form of unified history to argue its universal rights. However, the fact of the matter is that Indigenous peoples of mixed Aboriginal and non-Aboriginal ancestry need to be provided the opportunity to identify themselves as they see fit. As far as Larivière is concerned, who the Aboriginal peoples of Canada are must be reopened to accept and acknowledge all Aboriginal communities. As Robin White puts it, recognition of the Métis Nation and historic homelands is imperative and just. But so too are the separate and distinctive histories, culture, and memories of self-identifying Métis across Canada. Although they describe themselves variably as Aboriginals, original half-breeds, Aboriginal half-breeds, French Canadians, Bois-Brûlés, Métis Canadiens, half-breeds, Métis Français, Métif, Michif, gens libres, hommes libres, freemen, country-born, mixed blood, flower bead work people, Apitawi Kosisan, Otipe Misiwak, Wisako de Winni, Magua, Acadien, Canadien, Gaspésien, Hivernant, Malouidi, sans-mêlés, sauvages, voyageurs, remusqués, breed, bungie, burnt stick, half-wood, half-cased, pork eaters. The people these terms described were one and the same, the Métis. Consequently, Louis Riel rallied them around a central racial, ethnic, cultural, and linguistic identifier. If his people were indeed a nation and not solely an ethnic group, they needed not only a common origin, language, culture, and landmass, but a name that would transcend time, space, and borders. For Riel, Métis was the unifying term to describe his people in all their diversity and diaspora. For more on this complex issue, I would encourage you to read The Legacy of Louis Riel.